Well, election day looms in Vancouver, and city voters are a decidedly unhappy bunch, clamoring for change based on a new Leger poll conducted exclusively for the Vancouver Sun and Province. And I'm Harold Monroe, editor in chief of the Vancouver Sun and Province. And joining me is pollster Steve Mossop, executive vice president at Leger. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Harold. I'm happy to
Hi.
be here.
Thank Thanks for doing this for us. Very interesting poll results. Just over a third of respondents approve of the performance of the current mayor and council, and only about 1 in 5 think things are better today than they were when this council got elected 4 years ago. So, what does this mean for incumbents?
Wow, it's a really interesting time. If you look at City of Vancouver and City of Surrey, our two biggest cities in the province, we have some discontent happening in terms of a number of aspects of voters. They're not happy. They have a high level of need for change. They give poor ratings to their mayor and council in a number of areas. And the things that voters care about are also not pulling well in terms of satisfaction. So it's almost like a perfect storm of issues that are happening.
Well, you mentioned the issues. The poll asked Vancouverites to identify the three most important issues from a list of, I think, about 20 that you had in there in that poll. So, what are people in Vancouver at least most concerned about? Any surprises?
In Vancouver, and even throughout the province, we've seen a measurable shift in voter sentiment about the issues they care about. Traditionally, in municipal elections, they would care about property taxes and development and policing and cleaning up the city and sidewalks and the things like that. But this time around, we've seen a migration of voter behaviors and attitudes to incorporate a number of other things that are typically not in the realm of municipal jurisdiction. So, for example, housing affordability tops the list in Vancouver as the number one issue. 53% say it's either the number one, number two, or number three issue. And then we've got homelessness, poverty, mental health issues as number two. So, two areas that are super important to citizens are now seen as the most important election issue, even though in years past it hasn't usually been number one and number two.
Well, that's interesting. And the parties must be doing their own polling because clearly those are the issues that they're talking about in this campaign
It,
as well, and making promises, as you say, in areas that would more traditionally be seen as provincial or federal jurisdiction.
Yeah, so it is at the top of the list, and the politicians do have to address those, even though when you look at the majority of spending that your property taxes pay for are not to deal with those issues. So it is front and center. And then we've got, policing, public safety, and in Vancouver we've got a few unique things. In the top five is the whole problem of random stranger attacks. Again, in years past, that might have been pointed to a different jurisdiction and say that's not really our responsibility. Mental health is not under a municipal mandate. But random stranger attacks in the top five, we got cleaning up tent cities, not far after that, and the opioid crisis. So all these issues that are in the top 10 issues, only about four of them are really truly municipal issues.
That is interesting. And we used to often think of those issues as downtown east side issues as opposed to city wide issues, but you see them now showing up across the city.
Not only across the city, but in relative comparison, even provincial voters in Metro Vancouver are seeing that happen in other municipalities. So Vancouver is not unique in that sense, although the numbers are a lot higher in Vancouver. When you look at random stranger attacks, 17% of Vancouver voters say that that's in the top five issues.
Hmm. And then you also, as part of this poll, put together a kind of a report card on key issues within areas again that the city controls or at least has some influence over. And you asked respondents whether they are satisfied with the way the mayor and council have dealt with them. And what did we learn from those results? What's the report card? Like lots of A's or not so much?
Well, we typically are pretty hard on our politicians when we measure at a federal level or even a provincial level. If you get scores beyond 50% in any measure, you're doing okay. But sadly enough, this
Okay.
is the challenge in City of Vancouver is you've got the two most important issues, housing affordability and homelessness, at the bottom of the list in terms of satisfaction. So the numbers read that only 10% are satisfied with those two files in terms of how city and council has dealt with those areas. And even on things like property taxes and policing, you've got, anywhere from 12 or 14% to around 20% who are rating them as very satisfied areas. So very critical ratings in those key areas. when you get into more traditional things like roads and sidewalks and traffic management, public transit, waste management, and parks and rec, the scores on that are still low. They're less than 1 in 3 who give passing grades or very satisfied scores in those areas. So if you combine that with the issues that people are thinking about, the scores that they're getting, and that level and that feeling of discontent, we've got some real voter headwinds that are going against mayor and council right now.
Hmm. And it is mayor and council, and it's a little different with obviously with municipal polling than say federal or provincial, where whoever wins the majority of seats becomes government and becomes the premier. In this case, of course, you can be elected mayor and not have a majority on council. So is there any way from these poll results to discern whether people, who do they blame? Do they blame council? Do they blame the mayor? What are you seeing
Well,
in the
I was
numbers?
surprised because when we looked at satisfaction overall between mayor and the job that council is doing, they're virtually identical. And this happened across Metro Vancouver, not just Vancouver. So it's indicative of how voters are feel. It's sort of one, even though the mayor tends to get the most publicity and public awareness, there's equal weight put on how voters are feeling towards council. But that being said, we have there's no perfect way that voters are going into this election picking mayors and then supporting with majority councils versus just individually picking their candidates. When we ask people outright, which method do they prefer? Do they pick their mayors first and then pick city councilors based on supporting the mayor? Or do they choose city council and mayors independently of each other? And the voters are divided. It's really 50-50 on that.
Mhm. So perhaps one lesson for every mayor and councilor who gets elected is find a way to work together, because if you don't, the voters are going to blame all of you, not just one.
Exactly.
Vice
They may see
versa.
it as a division, like I'm doing a great job, but my councilors who don't support me are causing the friction. No, voters don't look at, they lump them all together into one bucket, and it sticks to all of them for sure.
I guess the big question for people when it comes to whether what's going to happen in Vancouver on Saturday night is will the electorate re-elect Mayor Kennedy Stewart, or will we have a new mayor? Ken Sim appears to be in the lead, but what makes this kind of a difficult election to call?
Municipal elections are always difficult to call because there's a lot of homework involved with voters. They need to review the candidate's position. They have to look at the platforms, and it's a bit of work to do it. And they typically don't do that till last minute. So when we poll on this issue, we have a very high level of undecided. We've got 40% in City of Vancouver, and this poll was only taken over the last 5 or 6 days, so it's very fresh numbers. But still, to have 40% undecided, that's about double or even triple the number of undecided that would typically go into the last week of an election federally or provincially. So it's always tough to call municipal elections, but at this early stage, based on the voter discontent, based on the desire for change in Vancouver, it does look like Ken Sim does have a lead. But any direction of those undecideds or don't knows can flip the cause and create a surprise at the end of the day.
Yes, and given the low turnout that we traditionally see as well, it's a really important to get your vote out as a candidate. I guess it's always important, but particularly
It
so
is.
in civic elections.
In civic elections, we typically, as you know, see results between 30 and 42% in terms of turnout. When we poll people, the intention is always a lot higher. Yes, I intend to vote. I'm going to get out there. And inevitably, there's this gap between what people say that they're going to do and what they do. So it's been very difficult to predict who actually will show up. It typically is engaged citizens who show up, so people who are involved in the community, who have a sense of duty and obligation, and we call it a little bit of voter guilt. So if they feel guilty enough to vote, they typically will show up. And so we'll see numbers, hopefully this election, we have enough voter interest and controversy that's happening that we'll see a larger, and with COVID dissipating, we'll see a larger turnout. But ultimately, it makes it difficult to predict because voter turnout is the key to any election outcome.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. I look forward to talking to you again on Sunday when the results are in, and we can look back on this poll and see what we learned and what we might learn about the new council going forward, or some advice maybe
Well,
that we might have for.
elections are the litmus test for pollsters, as you know, so I will be waiting as soon as those results are published in your publication, and I'll be looking for that Sunday morning.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks very much.